Well, here we are, two of the old explorers. I'm Stuart McAllister with Reflections Ministries.
Ken Boa with the same, and it's looking. I'm looking forward to this time together with you, Stuart, because there's some major themes that I have been wrestling with, and I know we both have talked about this whole idea of transcendence versus immanence, the idea of the tensioned interplay between God being up beyond our comprehension. That's where the stuff of what's called apophatic theology. He's a mystery, yet at the same time he's also revealed. And so he's immanent, and that transcendence and immanence concept is so profound because it tells us that we are image bearers, and as bearers of the Imago Dei, we are therefore correspond to the Trinitarian God in an amazing way. And the Transcendentals is something that I think is becoming a major theme with our talking and our thinking.
Yeah, and I remember the first time, Ken, when I started talking to you about these things. I know we've looked at it for many years, but this idea of truth, goodness, and beauty, and what role they play in our vision of reality. And I think one of the challenges we face is that for many Christians, this is a language that some use, but a language that has been lost for many. And that's part of the problem, the loss of a language, but obviously the loss of the ideas to which the language points. So maybe what we could do is you can help me, maybe help some of the people who are listening think through why in the role of theology and history and practical spiritual life, these ideas that the Transcendentals, what role they played and where they came from,
yes,
and why the early church particularly, and the church across the ages, big parts of the church today, saw them as actually central, not as optional extras in a Christian view of reality.
Yes, it's actually born out of the Trinitarian mystery of the living God and the idea of the unity and diversity, the one, the three, and the many that we've talked so much about. But I used to list them in this way, the Transcendentals, because I thought of truth and then goodness and then beauty. But I've switched my order in a very real way in maybe the last few years, because it's now, for me, God approaches us in general revelation through beauty. Even though it's a fallen world, it's exquisite and beyond our imagination, and that's being multiplied by science and technology to amplify our understanding of that mystery. But I claim that beauty is the connector between mystery and goodness and truth. So it connects mystery with goodness and truth, and God somehow evokes those things through the touching of the heart, through beauty itself.
Right, but some of your critics or some of our critics would push back and say, okay, but what you're not saying, if I understand though, is you're not changing the order. That, in other words, that truth is still, we have to adjudicate what is reality. So even if beauty comes to us as our primary connector, it's drawing us towards something, and that something we have to find has to be both true and good in order to qualify what beauty really means. Is that right?
So. That's precisely so. So it's not to denigrate or diminish those others, but it's to say that there's a sort of an existential encounter, and the way God mediates his presence is through the created order, and that's what causes us. The creation itself points beyond itself and tells us, even through his, we can understand his eternal power and divine nature being clearly seen. So it's how he approaches us. And I find myself doing this a lot with when I use beautiful things to actually be my bridge to overcome the watching dragons of critical objections to those things. So it speaks to the heart and creates a place of receptivity for the actual the reception of goodness and truth.
And I know that for many years, the retreats that you've done and the people that we've mentored, the people that you spend a lot of time and you've encouraged them. And I think particularly your Psalm 104, Psalm 105, the whole idea, all thy works shall praise thee, and speak of the glory of your kingdom and talk of your power, Psalm 19 and many other passages, that where Calvin talks about the creation as the theater of his glory. And I think one of the things, Ken, that people may not realize is how seeing the earth also as a text in that sense, that the creation speaks. It's the wonders of a flower, the beauties of a particular insect, or the wave patterns of the sea, or the crystals, all of those things that you have zeroed in on. Say, but look at them, but not just look at them, see them, think about them, understand what's going on. How did it get to be that marvelous? what does it say about the artist or the artistry behind it?
That's correct.
That shapes the thing.
It can be a force multiplier for worship and for awe, adoration, because it causes us to realize if we're really looking more carefully and understand what we're seeing things we don't understand. We're seeing things that transcend the ceiling of our comprehension. And that is a good thing, because we realize we're immersed in that wonder of mystery that science and technology are interestingly actually amplifying in our time. In an age of increasing skepticism, God is actually amping up the evidence itself for his wonders and his ways. But that is a universal draw. People are drawn to beauty inexorably, and that gives us something common, a common ground.
But in the history, Ken, of theology and philosophy, we'll come to where it was left, but the Transcendentals played a big part.
Yes.
So where was the sense? I think as the church came to grips with the nature of the Trinity, it came to grips. Where was that sense of which that was a core category, not an optional extra? Where did that really kind of gel for many thinkers? Is there anybody in particular? Was it Anselm? Was it more Thomas Aquinas? Does it go back to Augustine?
You know, it's interesting that you have both traditions. You have more of a Platonic tradition, and so that you have the forms, and we have the idea of those as being espoused by Plato, and he indeed speaks of the whole realm. In fact, kalos, the word for beauty. And then you have ethos for goodness, and then logos for truth. And so those realities were intertwined, and they wanted to sort out how they relate together, because because God is our creator, and because we are aesthetic beings, because he is the wellspring of beauty, because he is the wellspring of goodness, we're moral beings, and because he is the source of truth, we are rational beings. And so being image bearers, then, these are means of apprehension by which we know.
They were be forced to think, to exegete what they meant by the word God. They're also wrestling with historic philosophy, and they saw a fusion of the categories, because people were drawn through natural revelation, through the natural creation, to these features that they saw in existence. But the Trinity and the revelation of Scripture gave the narrative that began to bring them together in a coherent structure and flow.
That's correct. So what was apprehended and understood by the ancients really had anticipatory truth that Plato and others would follow, and Aristotle as well. They would see these things. And then it was the role of the church really to connect these things together with a Greco-Roman understanding, but to take the wine of revelation and use those forms and to enhance that understanding. But they were onto something very clearly. It's interesting, though, that some are more Platonic and some are more Aristotelian. I think there's one points upwards, one points downwards, as it were. But I think, like the School of Athens by Raphael, but both, I think, have validity.
And I think I've been doing quite a bit of reading of late, thinking about just history and stuff, reading through the Middle Ages and so forth. And when I think that the way it's often caricatured rather than the way it actually seemed to have been, where there was a depth of richness of community, of art, of productivity, of a love of the land, of husbandry, of all this kind of stuff that was often lost with the clash of modernity. And when we talk about the suffocation of transcendence, and maybe we should include that, the suffocation of the Transcendentals, because the modern world has created this kind of a rationalistic, machine-like model of industrialization and creation. And many of these categories seem to have been squashed, pushed out, or just co-opted, commodified into turning them into artifacts or products for consumption rather than indicators of our being and invitations to a type of spirituality and engagement with life.
Indeed, we formed through our own technologies a kind of a carapace between ourselves and reality, because we now have a thick wall that can protect us from the vulnerabilities of what it would be like to be as a farmer or whatever. So we have these technologies that mediate that, and after a while take over our understanding, our consciousness, so that in modernity we move more and more now, especially toward a more digitalized understanding. You know, the technological revolution was one thing. So that you have the Industrial Revolution. We think about what that produced, how that changed the rules permanently, and and then you go into there's a kind of an electronic revolution, and then nuclear, and then the next dimension of understanding of it as a digital revolution, and now even more a quantum revolution.
So there's we've talked about that. This may become a subject in a future discussion, but this whole idea of alienation, in which it seems that over time, I think, again, going back to the Enlightenment, where we switch towards a man-centered universe, God is pushed out both theoretically and practically. Then the rise of technology, and so rational men and women in control of their own destiny.
That's right.
So then we come down to our time, where we live in a world that is saturated with technology, and I think the sort of the rulership of mammon and magic and management, if you like.
Mammon, magic, and magic.
So everything is controlled by, lust for money, power, things, stuff, experience. But people are craving a sense of meaning and identity. They know that there's something flawed. But even as Christians, we lose the ability to live in a God-enchanted universe.
Yes, that's a good way to see it. Essentially, he's been replaced. The analog realm has been replaced by this digital realm in such a way that we no longer have a vulnerability, an apprehension, an appetite, and a seeing eye. We're all surrounded by beauty, but very few people wonder. And of those people who wonder, even fewer are curious. Why? And then finally, how many submit to the mystery that? I
remember a case in point. You were talking about an encounter with some young people recently, where a few months back, where they were wanting to sort of play with digital technology and things, and you were trying to sort of take them and look at the universe, look at the hardware, look at these things, and there wasn't even a modicum of interest.
Yes, because
the digital was so seductive. And I think we've heard that there's a couple of people, I haven't got names right on my fingertips here, but that we're talking about this replacement, some of the modern transhumanist vision of that nature has run its course. What we need now is the synthetic, the manufactured, the replacement. And this brings us very much, when talking about the Transcendentals, into the world of what Lewis was talking about in the Abolition of Man. I think we're very much in that territory practically these days. This is where we're living, where there are people who, the abolition of man as a created being in the Christian story, to the replacement of a manufactured something by sort of scientific and other kind of fantasy dreams of a future that is, again, another utopia.
Yes, and
or dystopia.
And they're always dystopia in these utopians. As we know, utopia, no place. But it turns out that it does lead to a real place, and that real place is dysfunctionality, anarchy or totalitarianism. And even here, when you become increasingly dependent upon a smaller number of people to control the whole idea of the digital realm.
Or the technological experts, they become the conditioners.
The conditioners. And who controls the controllers? And so Lewis's question in The Abolition of Man, and then that hideous strength, again, it becomes disembodied in the awful idea of actual transhumanism, of actually being disconnected from our actual or organic state, and to somehow upload ourselves digitally to some kind of a cloud is my idea of a hell.
Let's camp on this for a second, Ken, because I like where so the Transcendentals, by definition, are going to pull us into a world that is bigger than us, that is beyond any human or corporate humanity, because there's something above, bigger, greater, and more. The other vision means that some men or women together become the experts, the elite. They're going to rise there, but someone has to be the controllers. It's only got to be the few that manage the many. So the illusion of technological freedom, the imminence of new technology, the imminence of I'll be free to do what I want, is actually an illusion, because you're only going to be able to do what you want within the boundary of someone else's stated conditions for your own freedom.
And that's, again, the abolition of man. We lose our interior lives, but also it's controlled by exterior manipulators. And so it's really the immanence. So it's instead of the transcendentals are being replaced by the immanentals in a certain strange way.
And Lewis says, man's conquest of nature becomes some men's conquest of nature, and using nature as a tool over other men and women.
Yes.
But the transcendentals and your this radar you have, this desire, both existentially because you love it because of what it draws you towards in your own pleasure, but you also have that apologetic sense that this is so important as understanding and knowing about God in reality.
It accounts for things in a richer way. We understand that we can't live as if there's nothing beautiful, there's nothing that's good or nothing that's true. That sort of cynicism is stultifying, and it defeats itself. We appeal to something, some standard for right and wrong, even if it's our own autonomous self. But
you've raised a word there. That's a word that came very much to my mind, is the cynicism, because cynicism is the spirit of our age. But surely, in the absence of truth, I mean shared truth and objective standards for truth, cynicism is going to be a cultural reality adopted. And we're seeing that in the church and beyond. I mean, think of all that's going on. Everybody's an expert at deconstructing the motives of someone else. And what we're all left when we walk away from many of the conversation, well, what actually is the truth?
It's not connected with something exterior anymore, something that would be actually an analog realm that we could compare and see, but rather it's something of autonomous generation. But actually, they suppose it's autonomous, but actually they're imitators of those who have a greater autonomy over them. That is to say, the controllers. So they get this illusion that I am the self-directed person. I'm appointed to myself, so that the subjective self becomes the authority. But once that happens, what's the basis for that? It's the scripts that they've been picking up from those whose digital content that they are now submitting to.
And yet the Transcendentals, I mean, I can remember even as a non-Christian, it was obviously reflecting afterwards, that I realized that there was a standard of goodness and truth and beauty that I was inconsistent with, because when someone did wrong to me, I was quite free to do wrong to someone else. But when someone did wrong to me, I was outraged because they had violated my sense of what the truth, or someone lied to me. How dare they? I mean, I was lying to everyone else, but how dare someone lie to me? So there was some standard independent of my emotions and preferences that was calling me to exercise judgment. Of course, that's Lewis's, I think, argument at the very beginning of Mere Christianity.
Mere Christianity. So a person just says, "I'll take this seat here," or whatever. Who told you could do that? And immediately we're appealing to something. We know right away.
There's a standard.
There's a standard that we're appealing. So I use the analogy of a bunch of people. Let's suppose that half of them are atheists and they're in a line at an Apple store to get the newest technology. And I decided, I see there's 30 people in this line. And a thought experiment. I walk to the very front of the line. And I say, I'm basically a social Darwinist. Might makes right, so I'm going to take this position here. And now I better be very big to be able to do that. But the point is, how long will it take for these? Many of them are moral relativists to become absolutists. Who told you could be in the front? Where did you get that idea? So they live better than their philosophy, because they know some things are right and some things are wrong, and their very behavior reveals that. That's what Lewis does.
That would apply across the category. So if you would, on beauty as well, because there is, any of us have been to places where there was once a place of great beauty, and then something industrial, say an industrial accident happens, or like an oil spill, or flooding into a river with chemicals, and you see all the fish dead or whatever. I remember traveling in the former Soviet Union at one point, and in Romania. Once I remember, particular town in Romania, that's what it is. I think it was Craiova. And honestly, Ken, I can only describe as we're driving in, coming across the mountains down into this town. The air is red, orange. And as you come in, everything is black and filthy. And you're driving down through the thing, and there's glows from these furnaces that were just open. And it was pumping. I've never seen anything like it. It was pumping out, I guess, ash. And everything, the buildings were covered in it. The streets were covered in it. And I thought, it was like driving through hell. And I came back through that town some months later, and it was the same again. I was through there in the day and in the night. It was worse because it was black and dark, and it just seemed. But this sheer pollution, and you just felt this is wrong. That man's plundering of nature, man's destruction of this environment. You know, at one time that would have been a beautiful village sat in the Romanian hills within that beautiful area. Now it was poisoned and polluted by, you know, blind production targets of a system that was failing, killing people with the pollution, because no sense of transcendent worth. It was nothing but production and meeting these targets and goals in this socialist vision of a paradise that turned out to be a nightmare.
It's like an apocalyptic vision, almost like the world that you see it in Blade Runner, or places like that.
Right,
you see that, but it's an anticipatory understanding, and it's also very much like the world of the Shire when they tried to it's scourged. Remember the idea, or how Isengard is totally destroyed and turned into a polluted horror, and so. This intuitive understanding, the loss of beauty and the loss of those things diminishes the human condition. We know it's wrong. The whole nature of the ecology and understanding that, but relating that an ecological understanding to these other realms of human flourishing, and how
can you have a consistent ecology though if you don't have a transcendent sense of stewardship or a sense of the value of what the thing is?
That's right. And the simplest and I think the most robust understanding of ecology comes from these three mandates. Number one, our dominion. The second is stewardship, and the third is fecundity, fruitfulness. And those three form, in my mind, in Genesis, right there, the most clear basis for a true ecology. You have been given authority and dominion, but it's a responsible, accountable authority. You can't just use it as you see. You're going to be held accountable. But your whole mandate is that everything bears fruit and it becomes beautiful and rich. That's just the opposite of this dysfunctional, dystopian understanding that technology has ravaged upon us and our dependence upon it.
So when we switch to a consumer model and we consume the creation, and Christians get accused of this, so that the idea that the dominion covenant, or a distortion in their mind of what that word means, rather than it becomes domination for many people. But surely the Bible is very clear, and I think the book of Proverbs and many other passages, in fact, Israel's, all the teaching of the law was to husband things.
Yes.
I mean, the whole idea of caring for the land, nurturing the soil, looking after your animals, caring for the creation, caring and stewarding all possessions. I was just reading this morning in my devotions. I've been reading through the Chronicles, and I was struck by David's ordering of everything. There was a written task, there was a procedure, there was clear management, there were tasks that were written down. So the husbanding of the kingdom, of the wine, of the vines, of the horses, of everything was managed within a strong framework of accountability.
Yes, there was a beauty to that structure, and it was a richness, and it served well. It created wonderful logical structures, even the ordering of the tribes of Israel as they went around the tabernacle.
Yeah, they had a particular marching order.
It's a beautiful thing. So what you're looking at here is a dominion. They've been given the capacity to have dominion over all things, but at the same time, that's a dominion that they do not own. They're stewards. And so if they see, they will be held accountable for the one who made that. That's a higher standard by far. The whole idea of Hebrew national, we answer to a higher standard. Remember the idea with the hot dog, higher standard.
So
you see.
Let me push back a little bit, because it's probably good for maybe again in thinking about the Transcendentals. When you don't have the Transcendentals, when you don't either believe in them or they're irrelevant, they're implausible to you, what does that mean then? What does that work out? What do you tend to do? Because you were saying there about being immanentalists, so the pressure of immediacy, maybe the pressure of, I don't know, consumption, carelessness, lack of responsibility, value for things, for people, for things that really matter.
Yes.
What does that do to us?
It always leads to a zero-sum game. And we're only, I think, a theistic vision of under the human condition, a realistic grasp, but also mediated by the grace of the one who made us. Only that affords an other-centered win-win philosophy where everybody wins because everybody is actually pursuing the same thing. And the same thing is the one who made all things. And so that leads to shalom, to the harmony that we all long for and wish to have. But again, if we're not at peace with ourselves because we're not at peace with God, and we're not at peace with God, that whole idea that Merton described it, we're not at peace with our neighbor because we're not at peace with ourselves. And then we're not at peace with ourselves because we're not at peace with God. It always comes down to that vertical.
So that the transcendental, then, for this to operate, we need a mediator. Because in myself, in my fallen nature, let's say it without Christ, I am going to be a consumer because I'm all about me. It's all about my desire. Jesus and the gospel and the work of the Spirit reconnects me to the transcendent so that I am individuated, but I relate, but I need the mediation, just like I need in all of life, in my ethics, in my aesthetics, in all dimensions. I need someone to mediate so that I can really relate to the transcendent and the immanent in a healthy and an ongoing manner.
Which is a very rich mystery that only the biblical vision of humanity provides, namely that we're amphibious beings, we're spiritual beings having an embodied experience in this world, so that it now has both realms of heaven and earth put together. So then our task as in this soul-forming world is to become more and more in our actual our practice and our applications, our service of people, who we already are in our position in the heavenly place. That provides a richer understanding of what human flourishing is about and what human future is about too, because it's not an apocalyptic vision of negativity, but one in which all shall be well.
But it also says to me that we need a Christocentric vision, because we need Jesus, we need the gospel, we need the power of the Spirit, we need mediation to connect us to transcendentals in the fullest sense, so that we understand that truth is anchored in the truth. Goodness comes from the one who is ultimately good, yes. And that beauty is in the summum bonum, in seeking the one whose beauty surpasses all and gives everything its plenitude, gives everything its fullness, gives even us our invitation to participate, to come and be a part of this.
And then the Word becomes flesh. And so the idea that Christ is in us, the hope of glory, that we are in him, so that the immediate, the immanent and the transcendent are brought together. And we are agents in terms of people who are indwelled by him, and we are in him and he in us, to become manifestations of the Word becomes flesh, but through the prism of our personalities, in such a way that we're placed here for this time, mm-hmm. for such a time as this. We've been given these abilities and gifts. We've been given a mission and a purpose and a calling, but we're also needful of one another, so that there is a corporate dimension that's needful as well, so that it produces a collective shalom because of the individual relationship with the living God. So that's why my conform to his image, I start with facet one as relational spirituality, but the last, and deliberately, is corporate. So we come to faith as individuals, we grow in community. That beauty of the one and the many, the mm-hmm. diversity.
The integrated and the connected.
It connects us. All of this, there's a reciprocity and a respiration between these things that is centrifugal and centripetal, as we've said before. It's outward and inward, and it constantly, and the transcendent and the immanent. This biblical vision of that, of telling us that God is the wellspring of all things that are beautiful. And what does that entail? And all things that are good, because of we are made in that image. We have an apprehension of it, and all things that are true and we can live in that way. And so it's interesting that beauty is often more associated with the Holy Spirit, typically, the goodness with the Father and truth with the Son. It's an interesting way all three participate, but and indeed, even in the three basic traditions of Christianity and Christendom, beauty might be associated more with Orthodox, goodness with the Catholic, and truth with Protestantism. Don't want to push that, but it does deal with the logos.
No, but part of the problem is that is our tendency that we have seen. Maybe we've all taken aspects and featured one piece to the exclusion of the others.
Right.
And so the goal for us, I think the goal in the Transcendentals, is to see the unity in diversity in relationship.
Yes.
And so, like it says in in Romans, in him we live, or in Acts, in him we live and move and have our being, or in Romans where it says from him, through him, and to him are all things.
All things, yes.
So I think that's the goal I would see in this, is to be so enamored by the beauty of the richness of life, creation and its beauty, to desire the goodness of the impact of that in all of life, human flourishing, goodness, kindness, truth, justice, but root it in the truth that we are in a created universe, that God has called us to himself.
That's correct, because it's not one opposed to the other, but they all beautifully intersect and interconnect. Synergy. There's a synergistic union, and that's the Trinitarian vision of the triune Godhood. So one is not off against another, but they work collectively. And it's good for us then to realize we need to see, for example, when we look at beauty, we see also goodness and truth in beauty. When we look at goodness, we see beauty and goodness in truth.
Yeah,
and so we see them connecting together, and so it's a good way to see it. Yeah.
So it's a good place to glory be to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. What a beautiful picture!
The three in one. So that's the whole idea of the worship of the one who is the wellspring. From him, through him, and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever.
Amen to that.